let's say it's this one, shoots, well, this one shoots this one, this one shoots, wait a minute, let me see. On this one, we do it that way. Yes, because this one shoots Perry's table, and this one shoots that. But in auto mode, it kind of mixes up because Perry and I programmed it to get the best shot. It's really best to shoot cross because the angle is better. Now, here's one thing to think about. When you're composing a shot, here's the TV screen. You always want to lead the person. Here's the person's head. This is a simple rule with TV. There's their mouth. Here's their nose. The nose should always not extend past the middle of the screen. It's just a simple rule with TV. If you have the TV screen here and the person's nose right here, they have all this airspace behind them, it just gives the viewer an uncomfortable feeling. You never know this by just because everybody, when you go home and watch ESPN tonight or the news or whatever, that person's face is not going to be over here because good cameramen know to do that. So you'll see me, and this is the stuff that Greg and Anthony, and they don't know or care because I just do it. And again, they teach you this at school. So when you need to talk to somebody, go ahead.
I mean, not what it is.
Yeah. No, Here's another thing. When it's so tight like this, I'll probably do a 2-shot. And I'll probably do these two guys because they're the amateurs. Exactly.
So right now you're basically
I'm planning for the table, but you see, Wayne is so friendly.
This is where Phillips is, right?
So it's up to you. But let me talk to Bill real quick. Yeah, this is. I've got a mouse pad.
wait for Paul. Have to wait for Paul.
Yes.
I don't want to mess with it.
So we're going to roll Denon. We're going to roll Aja. Takes a second. We're going to get out of it. And we're going to check it. Both are rolling. Macros. So what we're going to do, Celia, you want me to check it? Mike, Celia? Wait, you give me the word. You know which it would be great is if you can get that nice city shot, that would be nice. We're going to air. Yeah, perfect. No, take your time. Yeah, I got you. So we're on 4 now. Stand by. I don't have it yet. That's it. Perfect. So we're going to go macros. Oh, to clear any macro, it's 25. We're going to go to this. Laptop. Take it. Perfect. So we're good? Great. So we just back. We're going to reload the macro, which is 20. The slate is 20.
I think he has to tell me once he's macros I want to do.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, you need to just come down when you can get off your desk and come down and play with me. I set you up for that one, bro.
No, I would actually appreciate it.
No, absolutely. No. But yeah. So with this. So we'll do this. We'll alternate this because having both mics on in front of the cluster, we can get the feedback. Just 1 sec. 1 second.
Good evening. We're going to go ahead and get started, but before we get started, we have a few housekeeping items. Just want to make sure that everybody's aware. Phones are, if you have cell phones, please turn your cell phones to silent so we can respect our speakers. If you need the restrooms are located to the rear and to the left. In the event of an emergency, we would ask you to please exit to the rear in case we need to shelter in place or duck and cover in the event of an earthquake. We would ask you to do so. And again, if we have to evacuate, we'd just ask you to go toward the back and then out to the area out there. So, having said that, let me begin by welcoming you all to our public workshop on our 2016 Draft Air Quality Management Plan. This plan is really the blueprint for how the Air Quality Management District is going to reach the attainment standards in both 2023 and 2031. This plan is very traditional in the sense that it relies on a very strong regulatory approach. And yet it's also very innovative because it relies on new measures that take advantage of those regulations that are being developed. It's also unique in the level of collaboration and partnership that has been demonstrated throughout the development of this plan. This plan isn't something that was created over the last 2 or 3 months. This plan has been 2 years in the making. Many of you have been part of that. Dozens of our scientists working closely with the California Air Resources Board, working closely with the business community, working closely with the NGO community. We have over 50 different stakeholders that were involved in numerous meetings, all providing input in terms of how this plan should be developed. And so this plan is before you today, and we're going to talk about what is unique about it. What are the goals that we have to achieve? What are the mechanisms that we see that make it possible to achieve standards? And it's bold in the sense that we're going to have an honest discussion about what it's really going to take. So I want to thank you again for all coming today. I want to thank the staff behind me who's going to be talking, and I want to thank the California Air Resources Board for their participation, because without them, we would have an even bigger gap to fill. So with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Phil Fine. He's in charge of our planning and rules section. So Dr. Fine, if you could come up.
Thank you, Wayne. So this is being webcast, and we are taking, if you're watching over the webcast, if you want to email us questions or comments during or after the presentations during the comment period, we'll show you. You can just email to AQMP@AQMD, as in dog.gov, and we can flash that on the screen from time to time. So we welcome all your comments, not just in the room, but also online. So just to outline what we're going to do today, this is a public workshop, and it is also required a CEQA scoping session, and we are also scoping out the socioeconomic impact assessment of the AQMP. So it serves several purposes. We'll start with an overview of the AQMP. I'll provide that. As Wayne mentioned, we have our partners here from the California Air Resources Board, and they will talk about the statewide mobile source strategy and the statewide SIP strategy that gets integrated into the South Coast Plan. Then we'll have some brief presentations on the CEQA, the scope of the CEQA document, the environmental impact report, as well as what we're going to do with the socioeconomic impact analysis. So with that, I'll get started. I want to apologize in advance. There's quite a few slides. Many of you are very familiar with the AQMP and all this information, but for those in the room or watching online that may not have been as intensely involved as many of us have been, there is quite a bit of background. So I just ask everyone's patience. There's quite a few slides. It might take 45 to 50 minutes to get through all the presentations. But then the most important part is after that, these workshops are listening sessions. They're about getting your comments and feedback, answering specific questions. Not necessarily the time for debate right now, but we definitely take all your comments very seriously. This is a draft plan, and even though it's been about 2 years in the making, there's still several months going forward that we can make revisions, and the comments you receive at all these workshops and in any form are going to be integrated into revised drafts as we go forward. So with that, I'll get started on a brief presentation. Is there a clicker? It's at the table. Okay, so again, patience with some of this information that many of you in the room know. The AQMD is a local air pollution control agency covering roughly a 4-county area. It's really the major portions of Los Angeles, Riverside, San Bernardino counties, and Orange County as well. It covers about 16 million people. If it was a state on its own, we would be something like the 5th largest state. And our responsibilities are primarily controlling emissions from stationary sources. These are the businesses, the factories, the power plants, the refineries, but also all the way down to corner gas stations, dry cleaners, and even commercial and residential buildings. We also monitor air quality, and we also have the responsibility of creating these plans to meet federal and state air quality standards. little bit of background of why we do this planning exercise. It is actually required. The EPA will set national ambient air quality standards, and they compare those against our monitoring data. And if we do not meet those standards, we get designated as a non-attainment area under the Clean Air Act. If you're an attainment area, you have some requirements under the Act. If you're a non-attainment area under the Federal Clean Air Act, a lot of much more stringent requirements kick in, including some planning requirements. And these planning requirements include a state implementation plan that demonstrates how and when you will meet those federal standards. What measures will you take to reduce emissions to meet those standards? The California Health and Safety Code also requires AQMPs, or air quality management plans, since 1979. And as Wayne mentioned, it really is a blueprint for us going forward to how we're going to meet those clean air standards. The AQMP, because our jurisdiction covers actually two different non-attainment areas. That's the basin, which is everything in those four counties kind of west of the Banning Pass, and then the Coachella Valley portion. So this AQMP covers both and has attainment plans for both of those areas. This will be our 11th plan over the past several decades. As many of you know, air quality has improved dramatically over the last several decades. This chart shows that we used to have, 100 different 1-hour stage 1 episodes a year. Now we haven't had one of those since for the last 20 years. And even some of the health advisory levels. But as we go forward, the US EPA continually reviews those national ambient air quality standards. As they review them, they look at the health studies and the health evidence, and then they'll perhaps make adjustments. And typically they make adjustments in the form of making them more stringent or tighter. That's why as you look at these three different national ambient air quality standards going forward, each successive one, we have more days exceeding that ever a lower standard. But even with those, you can see significant progress over the years, although, as we'll show, we have a long way to go. We also want to highlight that over the years, we've had significant improvements of air quality, as I just shown, not just in ozone, but in particulate matter levels. But at the same time, we've had significant growth in our population, in our vehicle miles traveled, as well as in our economic output of the region. And this is all at the same time we have significant reductions in air quality. So how does that happen? We have more people, more cars, more trucks, more economic output, more jobs, but the air quality keeps improving. And the way that works is technology gets us there. Technology advances in terms of controlling emissions, but also in terms of fuels and lower emitting engines. And that's how we're able to make these incredible gains and still have a growing and vibrant economy. So this plan is an integrated plan. There's many different air quality standards that it's addressing, and they're all listed here, and I won't go into detail, but they all have different attainment years that we need to address, and they also have different due dates for this plan submittal. But what we're really looking at is these 8-hour ozone standards that are listed here are really the biggest challenge that we have in terms of how much emission reductions we need. That's what's really driving where we need to go. And some of the other standards come along for the ride. If we can meet those driving standards, then the other ones we will attain on the way. So just getting back to the challenges we face. So this chart shows nitrogen oxide emissions, and NOx, or nitrogen oxide, is emitted from any combustion process, whether it's a stationary source burning a diesel in a backup generator, or natural gas in a boiler, or a heater. But also on the mobile source side, it's all the engines that are burning gasoline or diesel or even natural gas. So these are what we call baseline emissions. So if we don't do anything else in terms of programs or regulations, you can see going forward that the emissions of NOx, which are needed to meet the ozone standards, and reductions are also needed to meet the PM 2.5 standards, actually drop going forward. And the reason they drop going forward is because we've already adopted rules and regulations that will lead to these continuing benefits. So these are regulatory measures for the most part that lead to these gains. However, it's not enough. In order to meet the actual standards, we have to go a little bit further, or a lot bit further, and bring those blue bars down to those green lines there. So that's about a 43% additional reduction in NOx emissions in 2023, and then another 55% from baseline in 2031. So this is a challenge. And the biggest challenge is that 2023 deadline is only 7 years away. So we need additional programs, additional regulations to get that, to fill that gap in just 7 years. We also have a 1-hour standard for which we have not met. The 1-hour ozone standard requires about a 17% reduction 1 year earlier. But if we're on the trajectory to meet those green bars, those 8-hour ozone standards, we'll easily meet that 1-hour standard. And we'll also meet the PM 2.5 standards by the deadlines that we have. So unfortunately, about 87% of that NOx comes from mobile sources. And as you know, as a local air district, we have limited authority over mobile sources. Most of our primary authority is for stationary sources. So as you look at this, and this is now projected in the future, in 2031, if we don't have no more rules or regulations, we only have about 22% of the NOx emissions under our direct authority, while most of it lies with our sister agencies, the California Air Resources Board, which has responsibility for many of the in-state mobile sources, but then also US EPA, which has primary responsibility for locomotives and ships and aircraft. So you can see that our plan has to integrate all the reductions that are going to have to come from those with the authority to achieve those additional reductions. So as you'll see in our plan, we have our local stationary source measures. We're integrating the CARB strategy, which commits to reductions on the mobile source sector, and that state strategy includes measures to receive reductions on the federal side, and we're still continuing to work with EPA on those locomotives and ships and aircraft and interstate trucks. So just comparing this plan to other plans, traditionally we have done exactly what we did this time, which is look at those sources under our primary authority, which are the stationary sources. And we look through every source of emissions, every category, every subcategory, every sub-subcategory to see where the opportunities lie for feasible reductions. And those, like in past plans, are all in this plan. In previous plans, though, that doesn't get you to attainment for the most part. So under the Clean Air Act, if you're in an extreme non-attainment area, you're allowed to put a big chunk of those reductions that you need for attainment into what's known as the black box, or Section 182E5 of the Clean Air Act. It relies on the future advancement of technologies to show that you will reach attainment. It's not a specific defined measure like the other measures, like the traditional measures, but you can rely on some future technological breakthrough in order to meet the standards, and that would still be an approvable plan. But given that our first attainment deadline is only 7 years away, and also given that with recent developments in ultra-low NOx engines and other technologies, that we can now see the technologies that can get there. We can actually define the pathway of what will get us to attainment. We don't need to necessarily be vague about this black box anymore. We can replace the black box with other types of measures. And a lot of those measures are incentive-based, which is what we'll talk about in a little bit, about financial incentives and other incentives to turn over the fleet faster, as well as co-benefits from other planning programs, whether it's transportation planning, greenhouse gas reduction programs, air toxic reduction programs. Many of those programs result in emission reductions that this plan can take credit for. So while we're trying to be very transparent and open and honest about what it's going to take. We're not hiding behind the black box anymore. We are putting out there what it's actually going to take. So it's a combination of the regulatory measures, and those regulatory measures actually enable the incentives to work and accelerate that transition to those cleanest technologies. So just also in terms of past plans, we have in past plans, say in 2007 was our last ozone plan, and 2012 was our last PM 2.5 plan. And a lot has been said that somehow this plan is abandoning regulatory approaches. So I have two responses to that. One is, if you look at what the proposed regulatory reductions are in our past few plans, our past two plans, compared to our regulatory proposed reductions in this plan, it's very similar. It's on the same line, same order of magnitude. You know, we had 9 tons a day in the 2007 AQMP for a standard that was, 15 years away, 16 years away. And here we have 8 tons per day for a standard that's 15 years away. So it's very similar to these past plans in terms of the regulatory approach. But what the difference is that instead of putting everything else in the black box, now we're laying out the technologies and laying out the potential costs. So just back to the stationary sources for one moment. As I mentioned, we do in every plan, we diligently evaluate every stationary source of NOx and other pollutants as well. We look at the emission inventory, we have symposia, we take ideas, we've had this open public process for the last 2 years, we developed white papers looking everywhere for where the feasible reductions exist. And where we did find feasible reductions on the stationary source side, they're included in the plan. And I'm highlighting 3 here, looking at non-refinery flaring, looking at cooking appliances, especially commercial cooking appliances, which to date have not necessarily been regulated for lower NOx emissions. And then also, when you look at our largest sources of pollution, the refineries, the power plants, the largest facilities, they're under what we call our reclaim program, which is our regional cap and trade system for NOx emissions. So even for those largest emitters, we are proposing a very significant reduction in emissions, about 35% reduction in emissions by 2031, and that's beyond the 45% reduction in emissions that our board adopted last year. But one thing to keep in mind is because it's such a small piece of the pie, if all the stationary source emissions went to zero, we would still be a long way from attainment, which is why mobile source reductions are so critical to the plan. So as we mentioned before, we don't not have that primary authority over mobile sources, but we can work very closely with the Air Resources Board and the US EPA to get the regulation and the other types of measures that will get those reductions from the mobile sources. And you'll hear a lot about that today from CARB after my presentation is complete. What we are doing, though, is not just, we want to help those other agencies along. So our plan does include a series of what we call facility-based measures to help this further deployment of these advanced technologies along. CARB has already committed to the reductions in their state strategy. However, we can take some local measures that will help implement that as well. So what these facility-based measures do is try to work with the airports, the ports, the rail yards, the warehouse industry, and maybe redevelopment sites, and try to set targets and see if we can get emission reductions maybe on a voluntary scale, but if that's not working, we do have some limited authority we might be able to use on the regulatory side. So we're not sitting back and waiting for the other agencies. We are trying to push the envelope, and we want to help them implement many of these advanced deployment measures. So again, other plan highlights, we have again, working with other agencies very closely, and not just other agencies that are looking at air quality in particular, because obviously CARB is also looking at reducing greenhouse gases and toxic risk, and other agencies are looking at energy efficiency, transportation, goods movement. We're working with all these other agencies to achieve multiple goals. Again, as I talked about before, we need a fair share reduction. We can't put the entire burden on our stationary sources. We've done most of the easy work already. We've still identified additional work that we can do on stationary sources, but since so much comes from mobile sources, the state and federal sources need to also reduce as well. And as I'll get into in a moment, in order to really accelerate that fleet turnover, even after the regulations are passed, so all new vehicles sold by a certain date will be the cleanest available, we need to accelerate that fleet turnover to get them on the road, and that's where incentives and sometimes financial incentives come in. Other highlights of the plan, we have that 1 hour standard that we're still not meeting, 2022 deadline, but we have a plan that will get us there with absolutely zero reliance on black box measures. The 8 hour standards, again, we're not hiding behind the black box. We're going to tell everyone what it's going to cost and what types of technologies will get us there, although we still may need a little bit of 182E5 flexibility in the approval with EPA, just because of the very strict requirements that they have to have those emission reductions approved otherwise. So, and for PM 2.5, there's also some success stories here. Actually, this week, EPA found that we're in attainment for the previous annual PM 2.5 standard of 15 micrograms per cubic meter, which is an enormous accomplishment given the challenges that we had with that just 15, 20 years earlier. We have a 24-hour standard for PM 2.5 we have not met yet, and we project that we will meet that in 2019 without even any additional measures. And then for the annual standard, 2025 as a serious area. We're asking for a bump up to serious. And if we can get the NOx reductions we need for ozone attainment, even a portion of the NOx reductions we need for ozone attainment, we will also meet that PM 2.5 standard, likely earlier than 2025. The bottom line, again, accelerated deployment of these cleanest zero or near zero technologies. And right now we get anywhere between 50 and a little over 100 million a year in funding to incentivize this transition. But what we're looking for going forward in order to meet the standards, and I'll emphasize the only way to really meet the standards is to substantially enhance those incentive programs. And that comes out when we calculate out kind of on the high end of about $1 billion per year, which is a very large number, obviously. So that's what's new about this plan. It's not that we're abandoning a regulatory approach. The new part is we did not hide behind the black box this time. We see the technologies out there, we're defining the technologies, and we're telling everyone and starting the discussion about what it's going to cost to get those technologies deployed and meet the standards. So in terms of incentive funding, obviously it is important to meet those standards, but you also got to weigh it in the context of the health benefits we would achieve and whether that $1 billion per year is a good investment. And we would say, yes, it is a good investment when you look at the health costs associated with poor air quality. We'll work with CARB and US EPA, state and federal lawmakers to help raise this money. And one thing we're looking at is something like a federal clean air investment fund. The US EPA already allocates on the order of $1 billion a year to soil and water contamination cleanup. But there's no similar program for air contamination cleanup. So we think it is a reasonable argument that similar type of resources should go towards cleaning up our air, especially given that when you look at the numbers of people exposed to poor air quality and the health impacts from poor air quality, it is much greater than the number of people exposed and the health impacts from, say, oil and soil issues. Not to minimize those, but if you look at the sheer numbers and health impacts, air has a much larger effect. Putting those numbers in context, our basin gross domestic product just in our area is about $1 trillion per year, compared to $1 billion per year that we would need to clean the air in the area. We spend about $40 to $60 billion a year on energy costs, and obviously there are air quality implications to how we spend that money on energy. And then we have, say, SCAG's Regional Transportation Plan anticipates about $20 billion a year in transportation funding in the area. So in the context of these other planning efforts, other regional needs, the $1 billion a year for clean air, I think, does sound a little more reasonable. The other point is if we don't meet these standards, we're subject to sanctions, and or we don't have a plan to meet those standards, we're subject to sanctions, which could be much more than $1 billion a year in lost federal transportation funding, as well as other significant Clean Air Act sanctions that we all want to avoid. And we're currently working on an action plan in conjunction with the AQMP of how we might go about identifying sources of funding, who we need to talk to, how we make the case that this is a wise investment. So again, $1 billion in incentives, what will that get us? In 2008, the estimated cost of not having clean air quality in the basin was something like $22 billion per year. Now, air quality has improved since 2008, but the cost of the health impacts of poor air quality are still very high and greater than $1 billion a year. There's other co-benefits of the plan. It's not just about air quality. You have greenhouse gas reductions with the same measures that we would need for clean air quality. Toxic risk reduction, especially in environmental justice communities that tend to be clustered around our goods movement corridors, whether it's a freeway or a port, a rail yard. A lot of disadvantaged communities are located in those areas, and as we clean up the on-road fleet and the off-road fleet, the benefits will immediately accrue in terms of toxic risk reduction in those communities. Energy efficiency and the cost savings that come with that, potential clean tech jobs, incentives, especially if some of the incentive money can be raised outside the basin or outside the state. That's direct capital infusion of dollars into the region that will have benefits to the local economy. And then if we do meet the standards, or when we do meet the standards, just the public relations campaign that the area would have at its disposal, saying we finally have clean air in Southern California. Everyone thought that was impossible. The amount of business that would attract, residents, people that would attract, tourism, the Olympics, sporting events. No more questions about whether we're moving to the area with the worst air quality in the nation. The plan includes a detailed socioeconomic analysis, which you'll hear about a little bit later on. I won't go into details here. And just a little bit in terms of time plan development. Over the next few months, we're holding workshops this month. We are also continuing our AQMP advisory groups and our technical advisory groups. We hope to release a revised draft in the September timeframe. That's why we're asking for comments before August 19th, so we can incorporate them in a revised draft. We anticipate doing another round of regional workshops, just like this one, in the October timeframe on the revised draft. And then we're targeting December for our governing board consideration. So if you want to comment on the draft plan, again, every comment that is made publicly at these workshops is an official comment on the plan that we will take very seriously. We mentioned this email address that is good for this webcast, but it's also good at any time if you want to submit a comment on the plan. Again, August 19th would be great because then we can incorporate any changes or revisions to the plan based on your comments for our next draft. We're still accepting comments all the way through this period, but if you want to see your comments reflected in a revised draft, August 19th would be great. So with that, I also want to mention that the draft plan is out, and the control strategy, which is Appendix 4 in detail, is on our website. And in the next few months, we're working on other technical appendices that will be coming out this week and next week, hopefully. And they're technical documents, but it is really the foundation of the plan. It's just, it's hundreds, if not thousands, of pages of technical information. And again, we'll be taking comments on that as well. So with that, we'll turn it over to my colleague at Air Resources Board, Sylvia Vanderspeck, who will talk about the mobile source strategy at the state level, as well as how that integrates into our SIP. Thanks.
Thank you, Phil. Again, my name is Sylvia Vanderspeck, and I'm Chief of the Air Quality Planning Branch at the California Air Resources Board. As you are well aware of, California has some of the worst and most challenging air quality in the nation. So today I'm going to provide you with an overview of the state SIP strategy for meeting California's air quality goals and standards. Mobile sources and the fuels that power them are the largest contributors to the formation of ozone, greenhouse gases, and particulate matter. They are responsible for about 80% of the smog-forming nitrogen oxide emissions, 50% of the greenhouse gas emissions, and 90% of the toxic diesel PM. So in order for us to deal with these issues, we need significant cuts in pollution from mobile sources. And as Phil mentioned earlier, everyone, in order to provide for attainment here in South Coast, everyone needs to do their fair share. So ARB is proposing to do our fair share. So these emission reductions will be achieved through a combination of cleaner technologies, fuels, and energy sources. ARB released the mobile source strategy in May of this year also. The mobile source strategy integrates our planning efforts over the next 15 years for climate and air quality. It provides the framework for the state linking the planning efforts for the state SIP strategy that I'm going to talk about to you guys in a few minutes, the scoping plan update, California's freight action plan, and the short-lived climate pollutant plan. The state SIP strategy, which is an element of this, provides enough emission reductions for the remaining of the state to meet the air quality standards, except for two of our most challenging regions, which is the San Joaquin Valley for PM 2.5 and the South Coast for ozone. So the state strategy, South Coast drives the needs that we're going to have. The measures in the state strategy from today, when you have significant cuts from on-road sources. So Basically, on-road passenger vehicles and on-road heavy-duty trucks are reduced by 85% due to this strategy. One of the key elements in order to put this together is ARB relied on the success of our previous programs. And so the strategy contains cleaner engine standards. We're recommending increasing the penetration of zero-emission technologies. We're ensuring that emission control systems in use remain durable, expanding the use of renewable fuels, and conducting pilot studies to demonstrate new types of technologies. And then finally, we're going to be incentivizing the deployment of the cleanest technologies, since vehicles, trucks, and equipment remain in the fleet for a very long time. So let's talk about cleaner engine standards. ARB has conducted technology assessments with our partners, and we've determined that the cleaner engine standards that we're proposing in this plan are technologically feasible. In the heavy-duty sector, ARB plans to adopt a low-NOx truck standard. You know, as we know, here in California, a lot of the trucks that are purchased are from out of state. So we will also petition US EPA to develop a low-NOx standard on a federal level. It is very critical to meeting the air quality goals and standards here in the South Coast and in California. Oops, sorry. Didn't mean to do that. We're going to have to do similar actions in the off-road sector with a focus on requesting that the federal government regulate or further strengthen their engine standards for locomotives, and also requiring remanufactured locomotives to meet cleaner standards. We plan to work with our partners to advocate for more stringent IMO standards and efficiencies targets on the OGV sector. And then finally, staff is also proposing amendment to the ARB's at-berth regulation so that when vessels come into port, they can turn off their diesel engines and plug in to shore-based power or some clean alternative. As I discussed earlier, zero-emission technology is very key, whether it's from hydrogen fuel cells or from battery electric. So ARB plans on amending the Advanced Clean Cars regulation to increase the number of ZEVs and plug-in hybrid vehicles that are going to be sold in California. At the same time, we also plan to increase the stringency of the fleet-wide emission standards. We don't want more electric vehicles allowing other dirtier vehicles to be in the fleet, so we think this is a win-win situation. As we know, ZEV technology and batteries and fuel cells are becoming an increasing part of the fleet here in California. And as those technologies have longer ranges, we see that there are some possible other avenues on the heavy-duty side that can also use that. So on the on-road heavy-duty, we're going to require zero-emission and cleaner combustion technologies for advanced clean transit, for last-mile delivery, and for airport shuttle buses. Demonstrating the effectiveness of zero emissions in these niche applications will also help develop the technologies so that the on-road heavy-duty vehicles can also take advantage of this technology. For off-road equipment, it provides another opportunity in niche situations to introduce ZEV technologies. We think that forklifts, TRUs, and ground support equipment are key pieces of equipment that can go to zero. To further support this development, we are looking at zero-emission technologies. And this could include purchase requirements coupled with incentives for technology demonstration and deployment. ARB will amend our small off-road engine rule, and basically what that is lawn and garden equipment. We plan to tighten the exhaust and the evaporative standards, and then possibly include some incentives for manufacturers to produce zero-emission equipment. ARB will continue also to analyze the state of the equipment that's out there and do reports to our board to see where we can maybe push technology, things like worksite integration, efficiency technologies, vehicle automation, and fleet management technologies. Once you have these clean vehicles and engines out in the fleet, it is very important to ensure that they remain durable for their useful life. ARB will be working with the Bureau of Automotive Repair to assess the in-use performance of the OBD2 system. Most of the newer cars now, when they go through a smog check, they use the OBD2 system for their smog check inspection. So we want to make sure that that is capturing all of the emission control failures that it should be. On heavy-duty trucks, we plan on also doing some more on the in-use side. We plan on possibly including an inspection maintenance program, a not-to-exceed supplemental test, amending warranty, and useful life provisions. Finally, we realize there are many new technologies that are including things like hybrid and other advanced technologies that may not work well with our current certification process. So ARB is looking to amend our certification process to allow for these innovative technologies to get certified and for us to get those emission reductions. We also plan on expanding the use of renewable fuels. The state SIP strategy includes a low-emission diesel fuel measure, and it will require the replacement of 50% of the diesel demand with a low-emission fuel. Because of because of the demand side, ARB plans on implementing this in a gradual way, first starting with the South Coast prior to going statewide. The low-emission diesel fuel mostly will target pre-2010 trucks, off-road equipment, legacy fleets, and other off-road categories like locomotives and OGV. Now, for each of the categories, the mobile source categories that we have in the state SIP strategy, in order to meet our fair share commitment, we also have a further technology deployment category. Now, while implementation of the current program provides and these new measures I just described provide almost 85% of the emission reductions from today that are needed to meet our fair share, we still need to identify another approximately 15%. And so what these are more typical to what Phil had talked about earlier, this black box measures. But as he said, we now know what the technologies are. It's just a matter of getting them in the fleet and being used on a regular basis. So here are some ideas of how we're going to fill these further technology deployment emission reductions. We're possibly going to have further regulatory measures that we've identified through implementation of our current program or our technology assessments. We're going to use incentive programs for early penetration of low emission and near zero technologies. We're going to have increased operational efficiency strategies, and we're going to take advantage of some new things that are happening, like connecting and autonomous vehicles, intelligent transportation systems. As I mentioned earlier, or if I didn't mention, ARB also has control over consumer products. So the state SIP strategy includes the mobile source element out of our mobile source strategy and also includes a consumer products measure. And so what we plan to do is have a measure that, or conduct a regulation where we're going to consider both mass and reactivity of category emissions. We're going to possibly establish emission limits for unregulated products. If feasible, lower emission limits on some regulated categories and provide some alternative compliance options. This slide in front of you has the implementation schedule. We want to make sure that we're getting emission reductions as early as possible. As part of an approvable SIP, we need to tell EPA when we plan on taking things to the board and taking action. And so if you can see from the schedule, we have numerous actions where it's ARB, some where it's a combination of ARB in the district, and also EPA action. So once we submit this schedule to EPA, these become federally enforceable once they approve it. This next slide shows the emission reductions. As I told you, it's a very impressive list of measures that we have. And most of the measures have significant emission reductions. So we've identified in this chart the mobile source fair share for both 2023 and 2031. As I discussed earlier, the state SIP strategy is a piece of the mobile source strategy. And so ARB staff conducted a macroeconomic analysis of the mobile source strategy using the REMI model, which we looked at statewide costs, savings, and emission reduction benefits. The strategy is anticipated to deliver many state environmental benefits, including over 200 tons per day of NOx reductions, over 80 tons per day of ROG reductions, and 2 tons per day of diesel PM reduction. How this translates in the South Coast is about an 80% reduction in smog-forming emissions and a 45% reduction in diesel particulate matter. These significant reductions will provide fewer illnesses, reduced medical expenses, fewer lost days, and things like that. We also took a look at the costs, and what we determined, the strategy basically did not significantly impact the California economy. On average, our analysis showed that it slowed the growth of the gross state product by about 0.05% from 2023 to 2031. We also determined that the measures were going to cause some technological changes and that we can see some increased production costs. Consequently, we see that there could be some shifts in employment and output with industrial sectors, and that California industries could face higher prices for vehicles and equipment. So what are our next steps? We're having workshops this summer. We're participating in all of the workshops with the South Coast AQMD. We're also going to have a statewide workshop in August at the Air Resources Board. With the state strategy is used as part of other plans, we are participating with other air quality management districts that also need these benefits. The strategy is right now is out for public comment along with the environmental document. We plan to take it to our board in September. Once the board has acted on the plan, we will then make regional specific commitments in each of the SIPs that need these reductions. And then finally, each of the measures that are proposed in this plan will go through their own regulatory process. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Sylvia. Remind everyone again that if you have comments or questions that we'll get to after all the speakers, you can email what's on your screen at aqmp@aqmd.gov. Next, we'll have a brief presentation from Jillian Wong talking about the NOP initial study for the AQMP.
Good evening. I'm here to give you a brief update on the CEQA document and also to solicit comments on the scope of the environmental analysis that we will be preparing. We will be preparing a program EIR for the 2016 AQMP, and here is an overview of the process. If you look at it, highlighted by the green box, we are in that current step right now, where the NOPIS has been released for public review and comment. This is the opportunity for you to provide us with any comments on that, and tonight is our scoping meeting to solicit any comments you might have on the scope of our analysis. After the comment period closes, we will then take any comments received from you and put that into the actual draft program EIR, which will be released for a 60-day comment period. After that comment period closes, we will then prepare responses and the final EIR. For agencies, those we will provide the final EIR and the responses to any comments received 10 days prior to certification of the final program EIR. So currently, if you look at it, we released our NOPIS, so that's the Notice of Preparation and Initial Study, on July 5th. The comment period will close on August 4th at 5 p.m. Once again, this public workshop and the series of workshops that we're having serve as our scoping meetings to solicit comments. If you are looking for a copy of the NOPIS, it is available online on our website at the URL listed. We also do have hard copies tonight for you, and they were outside as you walked into the auditorium. The initial study evaluated all of the environmental impacts associated with the control strategies and any of the incentive programs in the 2016 AQMP. And what we found is that of all of the issue areas, the 7 that we will be carrying forward to be fully analyzed within the draft program EIR are listed here. So on the status, once again, we are currently in the NOPIS public comment period, 30-day comment period that closes on August 4th at 5 p.m. Once we do that, we anticipate the release of the draft program EIR in August for a 60-day comment period. Those documents will be available online on our website. And here is some contact information. You can submit any comments you might have to myself or Jeff at the address, email address listed below. If you also would like to be added to the email list, we do send out email notices when these documents are available online. So if you send us an email, we can add you to the list, and that way you will be notified. Thank you.
Thank you, Jillian. Last presentation, I promise. Dr. Shah Dabirian will talk about the socioeconomic impact assessment.
Okay. Close the mic. Yeah, good evening. My name is Shah Dabirian, and I'm presenting the socioeconomic scoping this afternoon. The purpose of our scoping meeting is to present a draft outline of our socioeconomic assessment for 2016 AQMP and seek input from public and stakeholder on key issues, assumptions, and methodologies. To ensure transparency, we have invited both members of public as well as the stakeholder to our scientific, technical, peer review committee meetings, short for STMPR, where most of the economic assumptions such as cost, benefit, and macroeconomic impacts have been discussed. The STMPR members are economists from academia, from sister agency, SCAQ, ARB, as well as other economists from the other consulting firms. In addition to STMPR, we have established a special working group just on the environmental justice impact analysis of 2016 AQMP. The main purpose of this working group is to review and identify methodologies for EJ screening tools, which is appropriate for identification of EJ area as well as for the impact assessment on the EJ communities. I guess I'm going a little ahead of the PowerPoint here. So, yeah. In terms of legal requirement, by law, by health and safety code, we are required to conduct socioeconomic assessments of rule and regulations, but there is no such a requirement for AQMP. And yet, we have been preparing those assessments since 1991 to better inform public and also equip policymakers with the knowledge to make better decisions. In 2014, per our government board recommendation, APT Associate audited our socioeconomic assessment, and they found that our overall assessment, including the assessment on AQMPs, have been more comprehensive than any other agency in the United States, and yet they came up with a set of recommendations. In this plan, we are implementing most of those recommendations to the extent possible. Naming few, we are going to update our health benefit assessment, update our EJ, environmental justice analysis, as well as improving clarity and transparency. We are planning to have our document released in August, which allows 60 days review for the preliminary draft and 30 days for the draft social. Now, let's just take a look at the overall document. We are planning to have a standalone, non-technical, easy to read and follow executive summary, which has an overall summary discussion of cost, benefit, and macroeconomic impacts. Introduction chapters include discussions such as historical trend of air quality and economy, summary of control measures, affected sources, policy, and baseline scenarios. Then we have a discussion of incremental cost of control measures. We're looking at the control measure cost as a present worth on an average annual basis. We talk about cost effectiveness of control measure in those chapters. Next chapter covers the public health benefit. In this plan, we are going to only quantify the public health benefit and qualitatively assess the other type of benefits such as visibility, agricultural benefit, and material benefits. Once we have the estimate of cost and benefit, we take those and put those in our macroeconomic model, REMI, that Sylvia just mentioned, to generate the macroeconomic impacts. And we are going to further discuss those impacts at sub-county level, sub-regional level. We have 21 sub-regions for our assessment, 11 regions for Los Angeles, 4 regions for Orange County, 3 regions for San Bernardino and Riverside, respectively. We also extend the sub-regional analysis by looking at the EJ impact and environmental justice areas. Actually, we have with the guidance of EJ working group as well as those such as the ones on off-road ARB measures for South Coast that affect the fleet nationwide. We are going to include only the portion of the cost which is attributed to our region and leave the rest of the impact alone. Now, incentive programs, as Phil mentioned, I'm not going to go over the whole slide. We need incentive program to promoting greener technology. Most of the incentive program will be spent on mobile sources. Now, how do we treat incentive program in our model? We are going to include incentives as part of the total cost. And that was a question that came out in our couple of workshops. How do you treat incentives? The reason for doing that, because we are going to account for opportunity cost of those funds that it could have been spent somewhere else, unless the money comes out of the basin, out of the basin or from the federal government, which is we treat it as a free money, which is no cost but boosts economic activity. In terms of incremental cost, we are going to include incentive as part of incremental cost. We are going to present the cost by industry, by control measures. We are going to present cost in terms of present worth value. We are going to analyze the cost on a small business to the extent possible, and also look at the cost effectiveness of control measure, both in terms of discount cash flow and levelized cash flow. Discount cash flow is the methodology that the district commonly use. And this method, basically, we convert all the costs to the present value. The capital cost is in a present value. We are going to discount the future costs or potential savings to the present value and then divide the result by the emission reduction times the equipment life. For a levelized cash flow, which mainly ARB is using, they annualize capital cost and they add annual operating costs, then divide that by emission reduction per year. So we are going to present both in our document. In terms of public health benefit, as I mentioned, we are going to present emission reduction concentration as well as by pollutant by year and over the year. Health benefit will be quantified by looking at the avoided mortality and morbidity from the reduction in PM 2.5 and ozone on the milestone years of 2023 and 2031. Once we have the estimate of avoided mortality and morbidity, we applied a value of a statistical life and cost of illness to monetize those values. In terms of other category of benefit, we are going to qualitatively address those. In the past plan, we used to quantify those, but since the methods that used to estimate those benefits were kind of old, with a little update, the recommendation was to just ignore them and just talk, just mention them qualitatively. Of course, there are other categories of benefit that Phil mentioned, such as the co-benefits, benefits from greenhouse gas reduction, and also toxic and cancer risk reduction that we cannot quantify. At the request of a stakeholder, in this section, we are going to include a discussion of the impact of unemployment on health. In 2015, we hired Professor Erdal Tekin, professor of public policy in American University, to looking into the impact of aggregate unemployment rate and health for the South Coast area as well as for California. What he found was that for Southern California, mortality is procyclical, which means that as economy improves, actually mortality rate will go up, or as unemployment increases, mortality will go down. So he couldn't find a positive association there. But in terms of individual level, he found that people that they are unemployed, usually they have worse health in terms of like mental and physical behavior. So again, once we have the quantified health and cost estimate, we are going to put that in our regional economic model. We are going to present those separately for incremental costs, for health benefit. So job impact would be presented separately, and then we combine those to get the net impact. Once we had the net impact, we are going to distribute those impact by industry. We are going to talk about the impact on occupational earning to capture any shift from high-paying jobs versus low-paying jobs. We also, REMI model can also project the competitiveness by looking at the value added, which is simply revenue minus intermediate expenses. We use that as a proxy for a profit margin. And also, we are going to look at the increase in cost of production. For those industries, they cannot pass on the costs, such as the national industry or the industry that they compete with the rest of the nation. For the regional industry that they can pass on the cost to the consumer, we are looking at the deliver price, so the final price. Also, we are going to look at the import and export impact of the plan. Lastly, we are going to distribute those impacts at 21 sub-regional level, both cost and health and net impact, and extend those to the EJ area to get at the final level impact analysis. And with the guidance of our EJ working group and consultant, we are going to expand our definition and criteria used for EJ analysis. In the past plan, we use criteria such as poverty rate, PM 2.5 reduction, and toxic rate, toxic risk. In this plan, we are going to include other criteria such as unemployment, education, and proximity to the hazardous waste. In addition to this enhancement, we are looking at the distributional impact of health risk on the EJ community. So that means that even within the EJ, the impact of the plan could be different. So we are working with a consultant and EJ working group to develop some type of inequality index to assess that. So that's conclude my presentation, and I have my contact. Yeah, this is the contact name for our section if you would like to reach us with the email and fax number. Thank you.
Thank you, Shah. Okay, so thanks for your patience. A lot of information there. We'll take public comment now. I'll also maybe intersperse a few of the questions we got on the web if those come in. So we're just going to have people come up to the mics. I don't think we did speaker cards, but if just raise your hand, I'll point at you, come up and make your comment. So any public comments? Yes, Yvonne.
Good evening. I was at the Montebello City Council meeting last night, and one of the items on the agenda was we've been discussing the Alameda Corridor East project, where they're doing all this at grade separations and improvements to allow the railroad infrastructure to accommodate what they're anticipating to be a very large increase in railroad traffic. And so the question came up, I was at the board meeting last week, and I thought I heard someone make a comment that right now trucking is a bigger, is being more utilized more often than railroad traffic right now because it's supposedly cheaper, and that was one of the issues that it's hard to regulate the truck traffic because that's not under the jurisdiction of the AQMD. So I just wanted to clarify, we keep hearing that they're anticipating this huge increase in train traffic through our area, where they're going to be going from, right now they have 2 tracks, it's Union Pacific Railroad, and they want to increase to 4 tracks. So I was just wondering how that's going to fit in with all of this, with your plans, and if they really are anticipating such a huge increase in railroad traffic, how is that going to fit in? Because I know you have plans in here to switch the engines over to cleaner burning engines, but I don't know how long that will take. So I was just curious to know about that.
If I may, I'll respond to that. I'm Henry Hoga. I'm Assistant Deputy Executive Officer over Mobile Sources here at the district. The growth in cargo movement has been taken into account as part of our projection into the future. And we've seen growth in not only truck traffic, but also in rail movement of goods. And typically, goods that are moved from the ports, if they need to travel beyond 400 or 500 miles, they do go by rail. The rest are by trucks. And when we looked at large tractor trucks, but the smaller trucks, like even the UPS type delivery trucks, all contribute to that category, and that's the largest category of emissions. Rail locomotive emissions are about 4th or 5th in terms of contribution to the NOx emissions inventory. So we do factor in the growth of cargo movement between rail and trucks, and the grade separation projects are actually projects that will help move goods through faster, so it reduces congestion at the same time. So we do take all those into account.
Okay, because I know they threw out a number that if the vehicle traffic is stuck at a crossing waiting for the train to go past, that was like running your engine for 20 hours as you're waiting. It was like, okay, that seems a lot.
There has been some analysis, and our agency, our governing board actually, back in 2006, 2007, supported funding for grade separation to help reduce congestion. We worked with SCAG and the local county transportation commissions to ensure that monies coming from the state and the federal government actually went towards these type of projects to help reduce congestion. and improve
Okay.
air quality.
One last question. Do you have any idea what's going on? Because there was a news report that the federal government had rejected so much money for railroad and other transportation projects here in California, that there was all this federal funding and they rejected the proposals.
I'm not quite sure what that specific action was on the federal government side, but recently there has been a solicitation under the FAST, Fixed America Surface Transportation Act, for funding. That's competitive throughout the nation, but we can look into that.
Okay, thank you.
The other thing I just wanted to add is, as you note, there are many different forms of moving freight throughout the South Coast Air Basin, and so that's why we felt at the state and federal level it's so critical to pursue more stringent engine standards for a large spectrum of different sources, including the heavy-duty trucks as well as the locomotives, and looking to get those in place as soon as possible, because those also lay the groundwork for additional standards for other sources as well.
All right, thank you.
Other comments? Hands? Yes.
Hi, my name is Eric Liu from Renewable Environ. I'd first like to congratulate you all. I've been part of the working groups, and this is an amazing accomplishment to this point. And I have a clarification question, which is, do I understand the analysis correctly, which is in Chapter 4, for all the control strategies where you've estimated emission reductions, does that get us the reductions you guys anticipate that we need? Like, does that balance out from all the other analyses?
If you add up all the proposed reductions, which include the stationary source measures, the regulatory, the mobile source measures, that as we're integrating the mobile source measures from CARB and the federal source reductions that are part of the state strategy, if you add all those up, yes, it does get us to attainment in terms of reductions.
So in theory, the ones that are all still to be determined, if somehow we didn't get any of those, we in theory could still get to attainment status. Is that right?
If all the other ones come through as anticipated. But
Yes.
The purpose of a lot of those measures is to help along some of the other measures, or if some of those measures don't come about the way we wanted to, and we find emission reductions elsewhere, even if we can't quantify them today, then we can always substitute. So those are directions we want to pursue as needed and if needed to help if some of the other measures don't pan out the way we would like.
Understandable.
Right.
The other question I had is within Chapter 4 as well, the adoption column. Does having a year there imply that a measure will certainly be adopted? Because there's also seems to be text for some of the measures, which is sort of like they will be evaluated to see if something even will occur. Is there any, I guess, implication to the adoption column within these tables in Chapter 4?
There is an implication because when you submit a SIP, you're committing to emission reductions and you're committing to emission reductions on a schedule. So you have an adoption schedule, but most importantly, the implementation schedule and the years at which you anticipate and are committing to emission reductions. So they do have an implication. If it's a measure that doesn't have emission reductions associated with it, then it's a little looser. But we still want that all the stakeholders know what we're working on and when we anticipate bringing that to the board, or where CARB might anticipate bringing it to their board.
Okay. And then specifically, for example, your EGM 01, which is the emissions reductions from new development, redevelopment, essentially an indirect source rule. Right. The text seems to suggest that may or may not happen, but there is an adoption date. So I guess, can you clarify if there is
Again, that measure is a TBD measure, which is to be determined. The intent of those and other facility-based measures is to help facilitate the emission reductions that are already being committed to in the state mobile source strategy and the state SIP. So while they will be looking for incentives or other mechanisms to advance the deployment of cleaner technology, we want to use our local mechanisms and authorities to help that along by working with our facilities as well. But since it is TBD, again, the implementation schedule is a little less important. But what we're also looking at those measures is we do have some limited regulatory authority in those areas, as you know. So the plan is to start out working with those facilities, identifying emission reductions, seeing how we can get credit for those emission reductions within the SIP framework. However, you know, if we're not meeting the targets we would like, we could always shift to a more regulatory approach. So those implementation dates are, again, are signals to staff and signals to the stakeholders of the timeframes we're looking at to work on these measures. And implementation dates aren't necessarily, it may not be regulatory. It might be regulatory, but it's still where you might put a program in place. It's kind of your overall schedule of where you're heading.
Okay, great, thank you.
Good evening. I'm Jeff Surface. I'm Executive Director of the California Hydrogen Business Council, and therefore represent about 90 companies engaged in all aspects of the role of hydrogen and fuel cells and electrolyzers and the amazing cross-energy silo opportunities that hydrogen often presents. So I have just a few general comments and a couple of specific comments to offer. First of all, I often find when I'm in a group like this that the staff work that goes into these plans is just incredible. At ARB, in this case, South Coast, the detail and the opportunity for the public to comment is just great, and it's a breath of fresh air. On the stationary side, just a comment that hydrogen and fuel cells can be used as a distributed generation option if it can substitute for combustion technology in the electricity production field. And I think as a general comment that can be recognized more clearly. On the solar side, there's a lot of emphasis on solar, as it should be, and wind. And hydrogen just has a very interesting role to play in complementing the intermittency of solar and wind, and in fact helping manage a grid with increasing penetrations. Now, we kind of know that. We know the PUC is requiring energy storage. But what's maybe often not recognized is the opportunity for hydrogen to provide a longer duration storage, larger bulk storage that maybe is not so suitable for batteries. And therefore, you know, a suggestion might be that the Air Quality Management District or the Air Quality Management Plan might create with CalISO and others a plan to actually maximize the use of solar and wind, with hydrogen maybe as the keystone of that. I think it's maybe a missed opportunity in general, and certainly a long-term opportunity. I would like to talk a little bit about ports, whether this is appropriate for stationary, for mobile, or both. Is really ports provide an interesting opportunity for a hydrogen-based economy, an ecosystem that combines a lot of the power generation, the goods movement, the freight, and indeed everything down to forklift opportunities to be converted into an integrated system that has even hydrogen production possibly at the ports, and therefore even integrated with the co-benefits of light-duty vehicle fueling. And I would suggest an integrated systems approach to looking at ports and that might allow for the synergism to take place would be a very interesting opportunity to bridge what is often considered to be a freight and a goods movement issue with what's obviously of great interest here to the light-duty vehicle space. There's a point in Chapter 10 where it says we're dealing with 100% renewable power, that renewable energy generation technologies must still be supplemented by fossil fuel generation due to the intermittency, and I would suggest that that's just not true. Hydrogen energy storage in general, but hydrogen energy storage can provide that balancing, that intermittency, the grid management tool that actually does not require natural gas combustion technology. The document, again in Chapter 10, focuses a lot on energy storage as an electron-to-electron saying, I know power to gas is listed in one of the tables there, it's listed, but the discussion basically is very oriented towards the battery mentality of taking electrons and storing it and reproducing electrons in insertion in the grid. Power to gas provides, again, a cross-silo opportunity for taking the stored energy produced by an electrolyzer and creating hydrogen, but using it as a transportation fuel, a higher value and a role for energy. So this is the power to gas model, or a piece of it. The role of hydrogen to produce not electrons again, but a vehicle fuel. And I would just say I've had discussions here, particularly in the last few days, and in a variety of settings. The difficulty in rolling out zero-emission vehicles, battery and electric, are well known, and as much money and emphasis is put by the Air Resources Board, particularly in building infrastructure and creating the synergism here, the fact of the matter is we have hydrogen, the vehicle manufacturers, the OEMs, now deploying vehicles, and they're really hindered by yet the lack of infrastructure. And I would suggest that anything that can be done to accelerate the infrastructure is going to allow at least the manufacturers to then accelerate the deployment of vehicles. And that is an urgent matter, I would suggest. Whatever we can do to quicken the pace of the rollout of this part of the zero-emission vehicle fleet will avoid the otherwise not reducing emissions as expeditiously as practical. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Those are great comments, and I think some of the highlights that you mentioned that maybe we didn't get enough detail in Chapter 10 are definitely things that we can include in subsequent drafts. So if you have more detailed info, reports or something on the power to fuel, send those to us through the same comment, and we can help incorporate that. And in terms of on the stationary source side, while it's hard to see in Chapter 4, if you look at Appendix 4A, in several of the measures, we do talk about fuel cell, hydrogen fuel cell technologies, but the point's well taken in terms of power to gas conversion and back and forth, so in terms of energy storage. So we'll take another look at that.
Good, and I'll give you some comments.
Okay. Any other comments? How about Tracy? We get anything online? So much for reaching the masses. Okay, if there's no other comments, going once, twice. All right, so thanks everyone for coming. We'll call the workshop to a close. There's 4 more of these next week in our 4 county areas. It's all on the agenda that you saw today, so you're welcome to come to those as well. It'll be very similar. If you want to sit through another hour of presentations, you're welcome. Thank you.
And I would just add that if anybody wants to talk to us individually, we'll be here for a little bit. So, Dave, if you want to chat over a few ideas, we'd certainly love to talk to you. And that goes for anybody. Thank you.